Hello, I'm Scarlet with Bloomberg Quick Take and Bloomberg Television, and I want to introduce our next guest. He is Jonathan Simon, Managing Director and Head of Leadership Development and Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Apollo Global Management. Our focus here will be on the next step of companies' efforts to become more inclusive. We all know step one is very straightforward: recruiting diverse talent, especially at the entry levels, get them in when they're young. Step two is to retain that talent, to keep them on board and develop them for leadership roles. Jonathan, welcome to Bloomberg's Work Shifting event. It's so good to speak with you. You are a fantastic example of the diverse talent at the senior level that firms are desperate to get into their boardrooms. You joined the private equity giant Apollo in the middle of the pandemic last August, and you've got a pretty big task in front of you. Private equity as a whole has, I think it's fair to say, a pretty dismal track record when it comes to diversity. It lags behind corporate America, and one could argue that it lags behind the rest of global Wall Street when we're talking about the banks, the brokerages, and investment firms overall. You had described Apollo as being in build mode. So can you start us off by explaining what you're building at Apollo to create systems that will support, retain, and develop the diverse talent that Apollo is starting to attract?
Excellent. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Scarlett, for having me. It's a pleasure to be a part of this conversation today. So as I previously mentioned, we are indeed in build mode. When you think about the arc of Apollo, it's, as you highlight, a $400+ billion asset management firm that has diversified its portfolio from its initial days of being pure private equity to now having an incredible private credit franchise, a real assets franchise, and we continue to grow the organization, both, as I said, from an AUM perspective, but also from a headcount perspective. And that's geographic growth as well, both in our London and Hawaii offices. And so when I say we're in build mode, we're really rethinking not only the culture of the firm, but we're in a modernization. We're modernizing our human capital function. We're modernizing the institution that, as you point out, over the arc of 30 years and having tremendous growth, how do we put in place those functional disciplines to really support the growth of the organization, being able to think more intently about how we recruit, develop, and enhance talent through the organization? So we're really building out the functional areas within human capital, as you said, in my role, which is fairly unique across corporate America, financial services, and specifically alternatives, in that I wear two hats. I'm diversity, equity, inclusion head and leadership development. So when we think about that build, it's how do we design and architect a talent philosophy and framework that can support the ambitions that we have in terms of developing a diverse workforce and, more importantly, an inclusive workforce. So how do we make sure we're focused on that manager effectiveness, ensuring that we're giving our leaders at all levels in the organization the skills and tools to be effective and to really drive the kind of organizational change that we seek. So we're putting in place those disciplines and structures to really support the organization that we want to grow into over the next 30 years and being the kind of place where we can continue to recruit the best talent from across industry.
Okay, so you're trying to implement a lot of things in a short amount of time because, as with anything on global Wall Street, something has to be done yesterday. And we know that there is an added urgency because of what we saw last summer. It was a real wake-up call to everyone, especially those in financial services, when they looked around at their offices and realized that we could be doing a lot more and we need to be doing a lot more. What is the timeline that we're talking about here for Apollo as you put in these different disciplines and capabilities and structures in place and actually look for a tangible outcome?
Yeah, well, the beauty of it is when we say build, we're actually not totally starting from scratch. We've had within the organization a number of things that are giving us somewhat of a head start with respect to the work that we're building. So just as an example, when I think about our portfolio within diversity, equity, and inclusion, years ago, we had launched our first employee network focused on the women at Apollo to really ensure that we're creating a community within the organization to empower our women. That work will continue. We've expanded that beyond women to include pride, to include our families network, which organically had always been something that we'd done. In fact, culturally, there's something that we do around Halloween called Apolloween, which is a very long celebrated tradition of bringing Apollo families together to celebrate Halloween. And we've just launched recently this year Mosaic, which is a multi-ethnic network to really support our ethnic communities within the firm. So those are some of the things that are already giving us a foundation to activate on. I think when you think about kind of short-term goals, because we do tend to operate with a lot of expediency at Apollo. And so like you said, you know, what have you done for me today? What have you done for me this week? And so we're looking to really build over the next several months a learning pathway to take our leaders on a journey to educate them. We're really rethinking some of our recruiting strategies. Historically, we've looked at recruiting directly from investment banks after students have done 2 years in their early career. Then we attract them to Apollo. We're kind of disrupting that pipeline to see how are we able to tap into the college students and really build an undergraduate experience at Apollo. So we're having those conversations, really looking intently about tapping into that talent. And we launched this year something called Building Better Companies, which is really geared for Hispanic and Black students who are in college to educate them on private equity and the alternative space more broadly. So to that point, and to your question, we've got a number of things that are in flight as we stand up the talent philosophy, as we begin to kind of architect what does great leadership look like. As you know, we have a partnership model at Apollo while still being a public company. So really being able to put a fine point on what does partnership look like? What does it mean to be a partner at Apollo, and really building out those competencies? So some things are short-term in nature. We're going to leverage the energy that we've got around our networks to impact the inclusion side of DEI. And then some of the things are a little bit more medium term and long term, particularly around our talent philosophy and leadership capabilities.
So can you give me some hard numbers? I'd like to, look into how you make the sausage here. I know, for instance, the target is to have the boards of the companies in your portfolio to have 30% diversity, for instance. Are there hard numbers? I don't want to say quotas, but kind of quotas around these goals in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term that you can share with us?
Sure. So on the board side, and I'm glad you bring that up, because we've done a tremendous amount of work, our team at Apollo, that really focuses on the organizational functionality and operations of our portcos. We spent a lot of time on diversifying those boards and really hitting and surpassing actually that 30% benchmark, which we did in 2020, and really proud of that. We're not moving the ball down the field on in increasing that goal beyond 30 at this point, but we've surpassed it and we want to continue to surpass it. One of the things that we're really going to focus on, though, beyond the numerical goal, is the inclusion aspect of bringing these new leaders on the boards. So really making sure that we're creating an inclusive experience. Is one thing to go out and identify, new women and new ethnic minorities to bring on the board, but what's the space that we're creating for those leaders to step into the boardroom and feel like they really have a true role in being engaged? Because our next metric will be, how do we evolve those individuals into leadership roles on the board? So how do we support them and really give them that infrastructure to be successful on the boards? The next thing we're starting to also focus on is helping the portfolio companies around their own diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. So how can we at Apollo serve as a center of excellence for them? And we just are in the process of building out a scorecard to help them think about, across a number of different measures, how they can measure themselves on diversity, equity, inclusion, not only from a representation standpoint, but what are their employee surveys telling them? How are they year over year improving on the inclusion side, which is really critical as you think about also trying to increase representation. It's one thing to increase representation. It's another thing to also think about how are managers engaging and leading teams? How do folks show up and feel like they're heard, they're seen, and that they belong? Those are key things that we're focused on at Apollo within the company, but we're also taking that to our portfolio companies as well.
Very well said. In terms of in the office place at Apollo itself, when I think about what it's going to look like once we get to the other side of this pandemic and as people start to return to a more normal environment, we've known that during this pandemic, women and underrepresented minorities have a lot of responsibilities beyond their workplace, and they often can't put in the hours that's become part of the culture. And the pandemic has stressed that, has exacerbated that, but also in many ways given them the space to do that because they can be more flexible with their work time. This is something that people don't always feel comfortable bringing up to their managers. Certainly not more than once, especially if the first time it gets kind of dismissed by a senior manager who maybe doesn't relate personally. What are companies, what is Apollo doing to acknowledge that and to make it so that it is something that the employees themselves recognize Apollo takes seriously?
Yeah, I think we've learned a tremendous amount throughout this pandemic. I mean, who would have thought a year ago we would be sitting here now with, significant amount of the population having been vaccinated, really beginning to think intentionally about what does a post-Labor Day workplace look like. We've given a lot of thought to this, and we're really trying to co-create it with our employees. So we first kind of said, look, we want to experiment with, because we're all learning this. There's no playbook on how to return to work after a pandemic, right? And so we've kind of given ourselves permission to say, we're going to try some things. We really want to be flexible. We want to hear what our employees find to be most of need to them. We've seen tremendously over the past, several months that business has been great for the firm. And to your point, as you highlight, our junior talent, our senior talent, people working incredibly hard. It's kind of hard to disconnect from the vortex of Zoom. And so we've said, as it relates to flexibility, it's kind of a barbell when you think about coming back. There could be an approach that says everybody goes back for 5 days a week, or there could be the other end of the barbell, which says, choose your own adventure. What we've kind of said to employees is, look, we'd like to propose a 3-2 model that says, look, 3 days out of the week, we'd like for you to be in the office. 2 days, have the flexibility to work from home. Clearly, we know based on the business, based on the function, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we're giving managers the flexibility to adjust and mold for their particular teams, how to achieve what they need to achieve in terms of 1, productivity and efficiency, 2, collaboration, which is critically important in our business. As we are an apprenticeship business, it's really important in businesses like private equity and private credit that our junior talent can come into the office and spend time with senior leaders working through transactions. We have really small deal teams. Our analysts get a tremendous amount of experience and associates. So we really want to make sure we can try to bring that back to life as quickly as we can in an incredibly safe way. So we're co-creating it with employees. We really want to create the space for our employees to have the flexibility that they need. We understand that many employees have different situations at home and will be juggling family and kids and education, and we want to create that flexibility for them. We've also gone through a significant renovation in our headquarters office. So when many of our employees return, they'll see that we've got a wellness center. They'll see that we've got a meditation room. They'll see that we've got new capabilities that we didn't have prior to COVID. And so hopefully making the workplace a much more flexible environment as well.
You mentioned that 3-2 model, and of course, it's going to be different for different lines of businesses, but are senior managers going to be also adhering to that 3-2 model, or will they be there 5 days a week, thereby putting pressure on their junior employees who get to spend some face time with them to also come in 5 days a week, even though the word from above is you can do the 3-2 model?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think modeling the behavior is critically important. I think we're all going to be kind of practicing this as we go along. The goal is clearly to have our senior leaders demonstrating this behavior every day. What will likely happen, though, I mean, as you can imagine, as we do begin to go back, many of our senior leaders will travel. They have busy travel schedules. If they're able to get back on planes and they're visiting investors, a lot of them will be doing that. And so what we do ask them is really think about what are those times during the week when you can really commit to be in the office, to create that collaboration, to create that engagement with the junior staff. And so that will be an iterative process. We really don't, we know that for some it will be difficult to just flip the switch overnight, but we really want to create the space for our managers to understand the importance that they have to be in front of the junior staff, creating those relationships, mentoring, and showing that visible leadership.
I want to give a shout out to an earlier conversation on the Bloomberg Work Shifting Conference. Our panelists from Prudential talked about how 1 in 4 workers are thinking about changing employers at some point, presumably when things settle down. And when workers are looking for a new job, for a new employer, hybrid and flexibility are key to where they're going to decide to work. How accepting of this idea is senior management at Apollo and also at the companies in your portfolio as well?
Yes, we know that, the work environment is quickly changing around us, and we have to be nimble if we're going to continue to attract the best talent to Apollo, and that includes flexibility. That includes really creating the space for employees to adapt and integrate work and life. And so we will be, as I said earlier, we'll be continuing to experiment around how we flex our model over time. I think with our portfolio companies, there's an incredible diversity within those companies. So everything from gaming companies to hospitals to retail. And so I think they will, those companies will have to adapt based on the requirements of their particular industry and of their clients, whether in person is possible or whether there's flexibility to do at-home work. So again, I think it's an iterative process. I think what we really hold dear is the ability to co-create these solutions with our employees. We're 1,700 people. So we've got the ability to be nimble and really pilot different kinds of work arrangements across the organization. And I think some of the needs may differ geographically. So having the flexibility also to allow certain offices, if need be, have different kinds of flexible arrangements. So, we're really leaning into the opportunity to be flexible and work with our colleagues and figure out what's the best solution for them so that we're maximizing their contributions and the environment around us.
Jonathan, what's the question that leaders need to be asking themselves and their teams to retain the talent that they do work so hard to bring in and attract to the firm? What's the one thing that you would advise those companies, those leaders do?
Sure. I think we're in an age where the word empathy is incredibly important from a leadership capability standpoint. So the more our leaders can be empathetic with those around them, really understanding that the work-life balance concept is probably a thing of the past. We really need to lean into integration. I think we've seen over the past year that has really worked, I think, worked in spades for companies, better productivity throughout corporate America, tremendous results and performance. We've seen tremendous growth across all of our businesses. So now that we've proven to ourselves that working from home does not take away from productivity, how can managers really develop their own skills of empathy and really building those relationships with employees? Because there is a pronounced need in a virtual environment to make sure you're checking on your employees, to give them that opportunity to recharge, just like any high performance athletic team. Same goes for our industry and our business, which is a high performance culture. How do you give that creative space or the time for folks to recharge? You get more out of your talent when they're able to recharge, when they have health and wellness. So asking managers to think about that side of the equation. And we're trying to really upskill our leaders to do that in a more impactful and effective way. And I think that builds that stickiness when employees know that the employer and the manager care about them, not as the job that they do, but just as having that humanity.
So, Jonathan, we have a question from the audience, and I'm going to ask it on their behalf. This is the audience's members' question. Is your plan to allow employees to choose which days they will be in the office on a random basis? And if so, how will this support interactions and networking? This goes back to the 3-2 model that you were talking about.
Yeah, so I'll just use a quick example. I think the businesses will decide. And when I say businesses, when you think about all of the functional areas, human capital may have a view of certain days that they will choose and allow. Just say as hypothetical, Monday through Wednesday will be days where we'll work in the office, and Tuesday, Thursdays are days where, we're encouraging folks to work from home. That doesn't mean that has to be absolute. There may be employees who choose to still come in on Thursday because there's a special project that they're working on, or they may choose to come in on Fridays because they like to be in the city on a Friday and go to Central Park. So there will be flexibility within the 3-2 model. Some employees will have special situations with their kids from a daycare sitting perspective and picking up their kids from school. So we will still create, even within 3-2, the ability for employees to work with their managers if they have a special need. But at the manager level, at the team level, designing that 3-2 where they get to select as a team what are the best days to optimize that engagement, and that will vary from business to business. And so that's the beauty of approaching this like as an experiment, really creating that flexibility for us to adapt as we need based on the individual needs of the team.